Let's read this Jeremy Carl article. We need racial equity in New York City for white people. Earlier this week, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, flanked by multi-hued cast of New Yorkers, though with no visible whites. The report itself announced New York City's long-awaited racial equity audit that attempts to assess the alleged dire plight of people of color across the 5 boroughs. And it goes on in this vein for chapter after chapter, but you get the idea. New York City is racist, and it's your fault, whitey, so you must pay even more taxes. But the funny thing is, if racial equity actually matters, it's white New Yorkers who need it. Oh, yeah, buddy, let's go. Because in almost every respect, New York City's government has been exploiting its white citizens without interruption for decades. This explains in no small part why millions of them have fled the city since 1950, even as the New York City population has grown by around 1 million. Only a million in population growth since 1950 in New York City is bad. That is bad. There are many ways that one could analyze the degree to which white New Yorkers have been used for decades as tax cattle to massively subsidize minority groups in New York. Obviously, these are statistical averages. There are plenty of white New Yorkers who are tax eaters and plenty of minorities of all stripes who are paying their fair share in taxes, but the general pattern holds. The general pattern holds. The general pattern holds. Drill it into your brain. Everybody repeat after me. The general pattern holds. For example, let's look at New York City's public schools. The anonymous online data maven Charlie Smirkley, using census data and information from a variety of government agencies, calculates that Hispanic students receive an incredible 11.2 times the education dollars per tax dollar paid that white families do. Black families, 4.9. And Asian families 3.8 times. Essentially, the white New Yorkers are footing a substantial majority of the bill for public school system, for which their kids are only a small percentage of the students. Stand by. There we go. Oh, not quite. We could do comparable analysis for a host of other areas, but perhaps the most important area to examine is housing, because affordable housing was arguably the centerpiece of Mamdani's mayoral campaign. Smirkley's analysis finds that Hispanics receive 67 times the public benefits per tax dollar that white New Yorkers do, and blacks receive 61 times as much. Even Asian Americans receive 7.5 times as much. These disparities are so staggering they are difficult to even contemplate. Is this racial equity, Mayor Mamdani? On a trip to the city earlier this year, I was looking to save money on an extended visit, so I booked a very affordable hotel in Long Island City, conveniently located just a couple of subway stops from Midtown Manhattan, yet boasting prices at around the third of the cost of Manhattan hotels. Unfortunately, I discovered upon arrival why that was. While clean and comfortable, my hotel was almost directly adjacent to the Queensbridge Housing Project, the largest public housing complex in North America, totaling approximately 7,000 residents. It is just a small part of New York City Housing Authority, which houses hundreds of thousands of New York City residents. Let's look at a picture of Queensbridge, huh? Ah, yes, this is, of course, a very famous. Everybody's seen this. Yes, this is Queensbridge. Okay, yep. Everybody's seen that before. You've all seen this one. That's a photograph. Bro, the first Reddit comment. Dude, come on. We're just going to leave that. I'm not going to address that. Going to leave that one be. While the neighborhood around the project, once one of the most dangerous in New York City, was clearly gentrifying, at least to some degree, with a Wingstop and a Wendy's among other newer stores and restaurants. When I got off the train, I was one of the only white faces of it visible. Now, that immediately brought several things to mind. First, there is the insanity of the left-wing concept of government-owned housing. If this complex were bulldozed and replaced by market-rate housing, it would almost certainly become hugely desirable and expensive real estate given its proximity to Midtown Manhattan. The notion that the government can permanently house poor people without accounting for the inherent dynamism of cities is pure folly. The second thing I immediately noted, subsequently confirmed by research, was the utter lack of whites in New York City public housing. It's something we almost take for granted, but we shouldn't. We should challenge it. Public housing in New York City is largely for blacks and Hispanics with some Asian Americans. In 2025, just 3.25% of public housing residents in NYC were white. Even Asian Americans, 6.2%, outnumbered whites, although the number of whites in New York City outnumbered the number of Asian Americans 2-1. The overwhelming majority of public housing in New York City is occupied by Hispanics, 45%, and African Americans, 44%. Of course, there are plenty of poor white people in New York City, and more importantly, far more poor white people who would love the opportunity to live in the city, especially in convenient places like Queensbridge, but they are virtually shut out of public housing in New York City. Is this racial equity, Mayor Mamdani? Democrats often oppose the policy of criminal behavior in policing of criminal behavior in public housing. When people with prior criminal legal contact are systemically barred from housing, the racial discrimination embedded in the criminal legal system gets infused into the housing market. While everyone wants to live somewhere safe, it is particularly important for whites. They have been targeted for more racial violence in public housing in the same way they are targeted in prisons today and were targeted in urban neighborhoods in the 50s and 60s, which helped drive white flight. And even when they are not specifically targeted, a general culture of tolerating criminality in these areas disproportionately affects whites, who are statistically far less likely to be involved in criminal behavior than the other overwhelmingly black and Hispanic public housing tenants. Blacks making $36,000 a year are more than 4 times more likely to be incarcerated than poor whites. A recent calculation highlighted by the American Enterprise Institute's Howard Hussick shows that an estimated 20% of violent crime in New York City takes place within 100 feet of public housing, even though this population represents just 4% of New Yorkers. Wow. That's per capita right there. Per capita, dude. Hello, Lima likes Homestuck. How are you? HUD has to go away, dude. And public housing has to go away. This is bad. What's the proper Catholic way to handle things like housing and rent control? The problem is that rentership ought to be the exception, and it is the rule. So the idea that we would have an ideal for a thing which is already not the ideal. Like, there's an ideal, and that is home ownership. All right, or stakeholdership in land. The question is like asking what's the ideal way to make a square circle, I guess is what I'm saying. Right? What is the ideal way to make a square circle? We can't, right? What's the ideal way for mass renting to work? It's not going to work very well. Like I don't know that there is one, right? Mysterian kind of nails this. He's saying the ideal form of renting is just renting from a friend. I think that's true. Like, unless you have a personal relationship with your quote unquote landlord, I really don't think you can make it ideal. And if you can, it definitely starts with strictly and harshly, maybe not harshly, but strictly, very, very strictly enforcing criminal law in the public housing, right? Because you want the public housing to be for, if you're going to have public housing, which I'm not convinced that you should, if you're going to have any public housing, it needs to be for poor people who are good citizens and genuinely can't get on their feet. So any criminal activity should just immediately result in eviction. And it's the very idea that the taxpayer ought to subsidize your living situation so that you can engage in crime is disgusting. So what needs to be done, the only way to do it well is really and honestly to like enforce criminal law. Like the first step is to enforce the criminal law, like very strictly. Does the government have a role in making sure people can afford housing, or should it be left to free markets? Yes, the government has a role in that. The way they do that, though, is by the way the government does anything in the economy, which has to do with human flourishing and fundamental human needs, is to do what John Paul II describes in Centesimus Annus, paragraph 42, where he just says to circumscribe the economy in a strong judicial framework, which places it at the service of human flourishing and freedom. So, yes, it does. What does that look like? The social teaching is very careful and very explicit every time it prescribes, every time it prescribes a principle. It is very careful to proscribe that. It is like, make sure that it is, you understand, it is not saying, here's the system you ought to use. It's never saying, this is the system. This system right here. We're using this one. It's never saying that. And it's very, very clear about that. It's very clear. So the answer to the question, does the government have a role? Yes. What is that role? You could come up with a number of roles, a number of ways to figure that out, right? You could come up with a number of roles or things to do, but the idea that we're going to come up with the explicit way that it's supposed to be done is also contrary to this Catholic social teaching. So the answer to the question is yes. What it is kind of up to each society. I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think that first, I mean, the criminal law thing would fix most of it, right? If you just enforce criminal law, it would fix 90% of it. I think you should have some scaling problems, right? The scale of it is bad. It should also be, if there's going to be public housing, it shouldn't just be like the Queensbridge projects, for example. I think it's a good example here because it's pretty obvious to anybody who thinks about it that it's not a good place for housing projects. Because the jobs that are going to be naturally available in that area to Midtown Manhattan and Wall Street are going to be jobs that are not the residents of that housing project are not going to be qualified for. So I think two things that would probably fix 90% of the problems with public housing are enforce the laws. And then the second thing is put public housing, make it smaller scale, as small scale as is feasible without becoming more of a burden than it is, but make sure it's also placed in an area which has jobs that those people can do and benefit from to get themselves out of that situation. Don't just put it anywhere. Put it somewhere where it is geographically, there's a geographic strategic location to somewhere worth having, I guess is what I'm saying, if that makes sense. Like some jobs worth having. What about something like young people being priced out of the places their families have lived for generations? Because one option seems like low-income cost housing, but that doesn't seem great. I don't think that can be solved by government intervention, right? I'm definitely less capitalist and would not put myself on the capitalist socialist spectrum at all. Compared to conservative, like most mainstream GOP politicians and voters. But that one specifically, I think, is not fixable by the government, but it's not fixable by the market either. The fix for that is normalizing multi-generational homes is doing a lot to is like you should normalize multi-generational homes as much as possible, right? Like to me, I think that the idea that a nuclear family wouldn't continue to live together until one of the children is married and therefore has to go off to form their own nuclear family. Like, I can't really see a good argument in principle for the idea that it's the separation should happen. Because you take on a lot of burden living alone in a sub-ideal way outside what you know is going to be your vocation, right? There's unnecessary expenses and housing costs and da-da-da-da-da. And then, it encourages women to get into fields that they may not want to be in or maybe shouldn't be in because it makes them less marriageable. It encourages men to take on debt and unnecessary cost to live alone, or live outside the home when they could be saving that money for their future family. It fractures the nuclear family, making it less valuable and less valued down the generations. I think that's a really good place to start, honestly, is if you want to fix the young people thing, I think you just need to it just needs to, like, you should just do multi-generational housing. Like that seems pretty simple fix, right? Like, I don't think the market or the government can fix that. That is a culture problem, I think. Achieving real racial equity. Given that white New Yorkers commit only a minuscule portion of the city's violent crime. Yeah, mass deportations also fix that, actually. Sorry. The thing the government can do for young people housing costs is mass deportations. You deport, 22 million people prior to 2017, so it's probably 20, and counting leaving and coming back, it's probably 22-ish. There's net negative migration under Trump 1, so that gets it down to like 17 to 18. 18 plus 10 to 20, I think it's probably 20 under Biden. 38 million people that are here illegally, not counting H-1Bs and F-1s that are legal ways for foreigners to compete with natives. I mean, you're looking at another 10-ish million, so you're probably looking at 45 to 50 million people in the country that are increasing housing demand that shouldn't be. Yeah. It's mass deportations and it's multi-generational families. That'll fix it. That's a fix everything button. The mass deportations are unironically a fix everything button. Will is just a little bit behind, I did say. Plus the illegals, yeah. Plus the legal here. I think it's 45 to 50 million. You could incentivize multifamily housing with tax policy, multi-generational multi-generational households with tax policy. That's true. Do you think they will try to ramp up deportations after the midterms? I think so. I think that's a bad idea. I really think that's a bad idea. I think they probably should have ramped them up prior to the midterms and done a lot of shock and awe, and then done it quietly right after them, like do a lot of shock and awe in the beginning of 2025 and let people get desensitized to it, and then operate at a steady clip through the midterms. Even if you lose them, you continue, because whether or not we want to live in a society, in a country where Congress and Senate are more important than the presidency. It's not. And ramping up deportations after the midterms is going to cost us votes in 28 that I'm not sure we can afford. Yeah. So I think they probably should have shock and audit and then continued. Yeah, the problem with media. But I think the media thing was a win. So here's the thing, right? I think the media freak out was a win for us. I don't think we should have backed off. I think the media freak out was a win because it allows you to appear. You could have done it in a way that appeared to be backing off or just desensitized people to it. Because eventually people are going to lose interest, and CNN and MSNBC and ABC and CBS, like, they need viewers, right? They can't talk about the same thing all the time. People get bored by it. You know, even Fox, people get bored by hearing the same thing all the time, right? Even if it's winning. Even independent media, trust me on this one, independent media, people get bored if you report on the same story for too many days in a row. I really think you should have leaned into it. Right? I think it was a win. I really do think that was a win. Yeah, I think that was a win that we fumbled because we could have let people get desensitized to it and kept doing it at that clip and that speed with that force, and it would have been a net win. I think we should have just wrote it out. That was my take on. I really think we should have wrote it out. People get sick of stuff. People forget. They're really used to consuming the news like it's fast food, and because people's interactions with politics happen in 24 to 48 hour news cycles, their political memory is 24 to 48 hours long. Right? Guys, Elon Musk called Trump a pedophile and said he was in the files over 500 times less than a year ago. And now they're friends again. And no one remembers that. No one is still holding Elon accountable for that. You really think that people would have held on to deportations being a little rowdy? They would have forgotten. They would have forgotten. Trust me. Achieving real racial equity would involve an even greater security presence in public housing. Strict rules would need to be enforced against tenant misbehavior and non-payment. Hey, there we go. There it is. Ramp up now. Slow down in September. People would forget by November. Right after the primaries, you ramp it up for 18 months. You slow it down leading up to the election. The GOP candidate wins, and then you pop it back up. You should just ebb and flow it with election cycles. It's the only viable way to get 30-some million people out. Yeah. There would also need to be zero tolerance for violence with particular awareness of anti-white racial violence. It is implausible that in a hyper-diverse New York City in 2026, whites would refuse to live in highly affordable units next to minority neighbors because of the color of their skin. So the problem must be content of their character, of far too many public housing residents. Banger! Yo! Dude, that's a bar. It's also anti-white bias in housing allocation due to discrimination against citizens. Due to NYC rules, if even one resident of a public housing complex has a legal status, everyone in the residence can qualify for public housing. What? If even one resident of a public housing complex has legal status, everyone in the residence can qualify for public housing, and even if they are legal immigrants, non-citizens are prioritized over citizens. What? This sentence, what does this mean? Anti-white bias due to discrimination in citizens. If even due to New York City rules, if even one resident of a public housing complex has legal status, everyone in the residence can qualify for public housing. Oh. Anchor babies. Anchor babies. That's what he's talking about. Anchor babies. If you have an anchor baby through birthright citizenship, if you are illegal, It's anchor babies. It's anchor babies. That's what he's talking about. If you are illegal and you have an anchor baby, then you now qualify for public housing. Is this racial equity, Mayor Mamdani? And yet there's tremendous demand for such heavily subsidized housing. A 2025 analysis from AEI's Hussick found that in New York City alone, there are 227,000 on the wait list for public housing apartments. The average income for a New York City public housing tenant is $25,000, and the average rent is just $588 a month. Dude, can I get public housing in New York City? You think I could get some? Think I could get some of that? Which is absurdly low. Of course, the stated incomes are a joke because so many public housing residents are working under the table. Yet even in these extremely low rents often go uncollected. Beyond crime, there is a culture of non-payment in New York City public housing, with numbers during the height of COVID reaching over 40%. Dude, what are we doing? Saying it again. What are we doing? In 2023, only 65% of modest rent payments were paid, with over $500 million in rent arrears. $500 million. White New Yorkers essentially locked out of public housing have to pay their own bills on the private market or they will be evicted. Compounding this problem is that whites and Asians are far less able to get into rent-stabilized apartments on the private market, 44% of which are occupied by the foreign-born. Oh my gosh. What happened to my country, dude? 40% unpaid, 44% of rent-stabilized apartments are occupied by foreign-born. So if Mayor Mamdani is interested in racial equity in New York City, I have a number of suggestions for him on how he could achieve it. But of course, the premise itself is absurd. Mamdani really has no interest in racial equity. Instead, Mamdani is interested in only in a pure racial shakedown in which his non-white constituents continue to milk the predominantly white NYC tax cattle even more assiduously, all while crying racism against anyone who dares challenge them. In 1950, there were approximately 7 million whites in New York City. Today, there are just 2. There is a white genocide happening in this country, and regardless of how much you disagree with the current Republican leadership, if you vote for the Democrats, you are a piece of human garbage who deserves to rot in hell, and I hope nothing but the worst for you, because you are empowering the people who are going to wipe out the historic heritage American people, the same heritage that was the cradle of Christianity and Christianized the world, and you're going to vote against it because you are throwing a fit because you can't get everything you want instantly. You can't have your delayed gratification. While you rail against the specter of these other racial groups who want their Gibbs, you want your Gibbs, and you're willing to sell your people out to murderers, genociders. For what? Attention? $7 million white New Yorkers in 1950, 2.7 million today. America's biggest, most beautiful city that was the gem of our empire, that was at one point our capital, and we're being wiped out from it. And because you can't get everything you want instantly, what are you going to do? Vote for the people killing them. Vote for the people replacing you. Vote for the people killing children in the womb. Vote for the people importing your replacement. Am I okay? No, I'm not okay. Let me read you a text I got from my dad. Let me read you a text I got from my dad today. There is strong evidence that the Lotts were one of the first 100 Catholic families in the colonies. We were definitely members of the first Catholic parish in the colonies, St. Francis Xavier in St. Mary's County. As a Lott Catholic man, you are foundational. To be listed as a tenant in the Jesuit manor books is a profound distinction that elevates William Lott, my first settling ancestor, from merely an early settler to a foundational steward of the American Catholic Church. This status places him within an incredibly small, elite group of approximately 15 to 20 families who live directly on the Newton Manor estate. The historical distinction of a manor tenant, being a tenant of the Society of Jesus during the early 18th century, meant that William was a part of the mission's internal infrastructure. This is not just a residential arrangement, but it was a spiritual economic partnership. The sanctuary circle, because the public Catholic churches were illegal, the secret church, the frame nave built in 1731, was located on this private 700-acre plantation. As a tenant living on this land, William and his family were the literal neighbors and daily companions of the Jesuit priests who kept the faith alive in the colonies. While the broader parish served about 70 to 85 families in the surrounding 100, only the core tenant group lived on the manor. These families were the immediate witnesses to the baptisms, marriages, and underground masses that formed the bedrock of American Catholicism. The Jesuits carefully selected their tenants to ensure the security and sanctity of the mission. Being a part of this group suggests a high level of trust and a shared religious conviction that could withstand the penal laws of the era. The philosophical and generational cornerstone. You are right to feel the weight of this cornerstone thought. From a philosophical and universal perspective, the implications are staggering. Catholicism in America did not begin as a mass movement. It began as a fragile, protected remnant of families like yours who are willing to live as outsiders for their faith. This is my country. Mine. My heritage, my inheritance. And I will pass it on to my sons. And I fucking dare you to stand in my way. What are you going to do? You're going to vote for the people who killed children in the womb, import your replacement, and then laugh at me in my face when I say, I'd rather not give up my birthright for a little bit of throwing a fit because I didn't get everything I wanted. Maybe, just maybe, I'm smarter than you are. I have more patience than you do. And maybe, just maybe, you're a whiny little fucking bitch who deserves to rot in hell and leave this country. You don't want to do what needs to be done to fix it. You'd rather vote for the baby murder party? Then get the fuck out of my country, because it's mine. It's mine. It's not yours. If you're going to vote for the baby murder party because you didn't get everything you wanted, fuck you. You're a bitch. Get out. It's mine. My inheritance. What are you going to do? Vote for the people who are going to celebrate 7 million to 2.7 million in our most beautiful city. What are you going to do? Vote for the baby murder. Yeah. Okay. I got an idea. How about I just deport you too?